operations here at Internet Research Bureau. And today I'm really excited for our discussion because today we're going to talk about synthetic data and AI in market research. So some of you may be asking, what is synthetic data? Well, it's not real primary data, but it is data that is modeled off of primary data using machine learning AI to mimic a real data set. And luckily for everyone, we have a great panel of industry experts who work with synthetic data and AI and its applications to tell you more about it. So today, we're going to have a 40 to 45-minute session, followed by a 15 to 20-minute Q&A. And so if you have questions from the audience, anyone there that has any questions that come up during our discussion, you can drop those in the chat box, and we will address as many as we can at the end of the session. Also, so everyone knows, this session will be recorded, and we'll be sharing it afterwards with everyone. And so now I'm honored to introduce our expert panel today, and I'll let everyone introduce themselves. Let's start with Rich, then Anna, and then Andrew. So Rich, go ahead.
Thanks, Doug. Hi, everyone. Rich Preedy. I'm one of the heads of AI for Insight at Verve. If you're not familiar with Verve, we are a global insights agency headquartered in the UK. Our tagline is we're the artificial intelligence, human and cultural understanding agency. So, and I think that'd be one of the themes I touch on today, the sort of a connection across those three different forms of insight, still very important to us as we move into the world of synthetic data. In terms of my own personal journey, I've been in Insight for around 20 years or so now. Started off very much in traditional primary research, talking to real people. In the last sort of 3 or 4 years, became increasingly interested in how you can generate insight without always talking to real people, which took me into machine learning and extracting value from large, unstructured, messy data sets from social media and other places, and then that took a natural evolution into the power of generative AI and how we start to apply and embed that within our insight approaches as well. So really pleased to be here today and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks. Anna, go ahead.
Yes, hello everyone and welcome to our session. My name is Anna Marszalik. I work in Accenture and I'm the global lead of Human Insights team in Accenture. That's the team that actually is responsible for discovering and bringing insights through different kinds of primary research, including quantitative surveys, experiential research, and in-depth interviewing. And we do this work for both purposes, client work and thought leadership. And before Accenture, I was the founder of the first 50+ marketing agency in Poland, and I led this agency for a couple of years. And before that, I had held a few different research positions in the media and advertising industry. And before that session, one comment I need to make. So as you heard, I'm leading the Human Insights team. So you can imagine how exciting for me it is to now switch to the synthetic mode to discuss it. So I'm very much looking forward to talk to my colleagues about that.
Thank you, Anna. Andrew, take it away.
Sure, and if at any time you see it, I might be blurry, just let me know. We had to switch over to a hotspot on my end. My power just went out. So my name is Andrew Santana. I'm head of panel management over at Remesh. If you're not familiar with Remesh is a qualitative platform where individuals will go and answer responses from other individuals, and then they'll compare their responses to others. We actually use AI as a support mechanism to fill in the gaps for whenever individuals don't see questions. And so this conversation is definitely near and dear to my heart. The background that I have comes from academia. I've done research in-house. I had Katie, pretty much project management. If you've heard of Dynata, which I'm certain you have, I was a project manager there for a few years. Went into sales, and then I also am now currently the, as I stated, the head of panel management. And what I do is essentially integrate the processes for DIY tools into our platform to ensure that they actually work effectively.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone, for your introductions. And before we get into the discussion, I just want to remind everyone that our goal today is that after the webinar, you're going to have a better understanding of synthetic data and AI and how it's used in market research, but also you'll be mindful of the pros and cons. So we're trying to give you a full scope understanding of the process, how it works, and how to use it and how not to use it. And so with that, let's open the conversation today with our first question. Anna, you are the lucky one who gets to go first. We'll start with talking about how is AI changing data collection and generation? How are we using it to collect and generate primary and synthetic data? You talked to me a lot about experience from your market research over the past 20 years. Why don't you give some insight into the past and where it's going now and that whole overview, please.
Sure. So how many hours do I have to address that one? Because
approximately 3 hours.
Because
yes.
when we talk about the impact of Gen AI on research, then probably it's more about hours than minutes. But no, seriously. So my immediate reaction on your question was that I'm very, very well positioned person to answer this question because I've been working in the research industry for more than 20 years. But then I realized that actually I can stick only to my experience in Accenture, and I tell you why. I joined Accenture 5.5 years ago, and when I compare now the way how we used to work on research at the time when I joined versus what we are doing today is like a completely different story and a completely different reality. And there is actually, so only 5 years, right? And there's actually one reason behind, and this reason is called AI. So when I think about it, I can, with a totally full confidence, I can tell you that AI is present, is a contributor, is a driver at every stage of the research process today. So starting from the design. So when, let's say, you have a hypothesis you need to validate, or you have a questions in your questionnaire draft, then AI comes to play the role. Then the stage of scoping, when you're considering the new population to take it into account potentially as a part of your, target audience and potential respondents, AI. Then the execution, and here my favorite example, AI interviewers. So this is something that I would love to recommend to everyone here in this call. If you ever had a chance, please try to take through this kind of experience, not as a researcher, but as an interviewee, just to see how it is to interact with the AI interlocutor with you, who can ask you the questions and at the same time in parallel analyze the responses from the other respondents and adjust, in the real time what he, she, it is, asking you. So amazing experience when you're interviewee. And then the data analysis stage. So here we could probably give a plenty of examples how that that area has been impacted by Gen AI, but something I would highlight are the new possibilities in terms of the analysis of the unstructured data. So open-ended questions, transcripts from the in-depth interviews. This is where the new, reality opened for us. So all those things, they definitely require from us completely new skills. So being a researcher today is something different than it used to be 20 years ago when I started, and 5 years ago when I joined Accenture. But all those elements, they really give us very tangible benefits, very tangible value in terms of productivity, cost, time, creativity, scalability, and so on. But the very important point I want to mention, everything that I've listed so far, so these examples, these areas, they're pretty much about how AI has changed the way we work with the research as we knew it, as we've known it for many years. And this is the one chapter. But now the new chapter has begun in my view, which is not about how AI has modified what there used to be, but it's about bringing something completely new to the table. So you won't be surprised if I tell you that this is about the synthetic data. And while everything that I've listed really requires many different skills, then when it comes to the synthetic data, I would say that it requires also the shift of our mindsets now. So I think we're going to discuss that in the details during this meeting today. So yeah, big revolution, that's for sure. But one more thing to add, when we already thought okay, this is already natural, AI in research, that's our, everyday life, then something new comes. And again, this is the exciting, journey in the front of us. So synthetic data, oh yes.
Yeah, thank you. And like you said, we're going to talk more about synthetic data right now. So before we move to the next question, to expand on this a little bit, Rich, why don't you give us quick insight on what synthetic data is, expand on my very brief introduction definition of it. You can speak to that, please.
Sure. I mean, I think it's worth taking a pause and having a think about the term synthetic data, because I think it's being used as a catch-all in the industry for anything which is sort of artificially generated data. But from the areas in which we're playing, there are various different types of synthetic data and ways of applying it. So on one hand, I think there's the kind of synthetic populations, which is perhaps the most common use of synthetic data, which is using artificially generated data to sort of fill gaps or scale insights, create these synthetic populations. Then there's models which are often called digital twins, which is almost taking existing, say, quantitative data, mirroring some of those real data sets statistically robust, and then expanding and extrapolating from those data sets in order to generate the bigger samples effectively to use for insight. And then the third area, which is where we've been sort of playing most, is again very similar to that. We're starting with real data sets and then using the power of generative AI to effectively model those. But what we're doing with that information is creating audience simulations effectively. So taking that real life data, often client-owned proprietary data, and using that to train an AI to effectively act like and replicate how a particular audience segment or persona would act, so that those individuals can start to mirror real-world behavior or real-world attitudes and preferences, should I say. Now, they tend to be slightly more qualitative, I suppose, in the way that you interact with them and the sort of data they produce, but they can also do directional sort of quant data as well. So all of these three things they have a lot in common, a lot of similarities, but they all have their own different sort of flavors as well. And so it's probably worth thinking about these different forms of synthetic data as part of the conversation today as we go through. The key thing for me, though, is when we're talking about synthetic data is where it has more credibility and more application is where you understand how that data has been generated. So what's the starting data set that's used to train the AI? How can you validate and verify the insights that are coming from the models that are built? And that's all got to start with a robust, credible, trusted data set to begin with, of some form or another. And that's the kind of key starting point for us and our use and understanding of synthetic data.
Very good. Thank you. Andrew, why don't we move into thinking about when and why and when we should use primary data versus synthetic data, vice versa? Are there parameters to keep in mind? Go ahead.
Yeah, and so this is going to be one of those things where I think we can all kind of have a discussion over it. My personal opinion is going to be that if there's something on the line, primary data should be used, and then utilizing synthetic data to essentially extrapolate or empower the already existing data should be the application that exists. So for us, whatever we do it at Remesh, it's going to be something where we create a conversation. People aren't able to see all the responses of all the other individuals because one of the tasks is essentially to compare other people's responses. And you have a specific time frame that you have to do this in. So you have 100 respondents. You're not going to be able to see all 100 other respondents' answers. So what we do is utilize the AI tools to essentially assume data based off of the already existing variables in the primary data. And so what I'd actually like to do here is kind of have a conversation between you guys to see if this is in line with what you are thinking, or if there's something where we can actually divide this up to where synthetic data is important in this role only, and primary data is important in this role only, or if there's something that I might be missing here, because this is the conversation I'm really interested in. Because for me, I think primary data is here to stay, and synthetic data is going to be something that enables it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I can jump in there, I agree with you. For me, the most sort of effective strategy going forward and the best application of synthetic data is when it is combined with real data. So I think hybrid approaches are probably going to be the way forward, and that's certainly how we're working with them at the moment. That said, there are certain applications where we are sort of comfortable substituting out real interviews with real people in primary research and using the sort of tested AI models to work with. And that tends to be more, say, preliminary testing, hypothesis generation, early stage ideation, all those kind of to some extent more creative aspects of insight. They can be really powerful tools as standalone within those sort of contexts, actually helping to streamline or generate hypotheses before you go into primary research. Actually, the models there by themselves work really, really well. When we're getting into kind of more deeper, more strategic insight, then I think that's where the combination of the two working in tandem with each other is really, really effective. And from our perspective, AI really should be, I guess, a co-pilot for delivering the consumer truth. So it's not replacing the human, but it's working alongside. And sometimes you're getting the same answer, but it's just coming through a different lens effectively. But the way we see it, like you would with any insight, it's about triangulating data points from various sources, one of which might be your synthetic AI generated data, and combining that with primary in order to come up with a truth and help to make a decision. But very much that need for triangulation, which has always existed in research, continues to be the case. It's just that synthetic data can be incredibly powerful part of that toolkit, I think, to get to that decision-making point.
Yeah,
And one thing,
I couldn't. Yeah, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I couldn't agree more with that. So mainly with a statement that the primary data and the human generated or real world data will exist and should exist because of a couple of reasons. When I think about the synthetic data as a part of this bigger family of the data, so to say, and the hybrid approach, there are some sort of big thoughts that come to my mind. So the first of them is that, in my view, synthetic data is like every other tool in the world. So we cannot simply say it is good or it is bad. We cannot say it's safe, it's not safe, or it is reliable or not, because everything depends on who really keeps that in their hand, and who is going to use it. So that's the very first thing. And by the way, that also pertains to the primary data and whatever kind of data we can imagine in the world. So everything depends on who and why is doing this. Then the second thing, in my view, is about the objective and the interpretation. And I think I have a good analogy from the old traditional research times here, which is about the qualitative and quantitative research. So many times in my professional career, I heard a question from different stakeholders like, Anna, is it worth really doing this qualitative research? You can have a survey of 2,000 respondents. Why do you want to take 7 people, put them in the room around the focus group table and analyze what they say? It doesn't make sense. It's not a representative. My answer is, I cannot tell you whether this is good or bad in general. Everything depends what is your purpose, what you want to learn. That's the first thing. And that you need to understand. So why am I doing this? What it can give me? And the second thing, will you be able to properly interpret the data that you get from this discussion? And in my view, exactly the same thing pertains to synthetic data. First, let's ask ourselves a question. Does it really fit the objective of my project, right? That's the first thing. And the second thing, okay, is the interpretation first of all, do I have the expertise to, have the right interpretation? Because that's a challenging thing. And I will be able to sell it or explain it to my clients. That's another story. But understanding of, objective and the interpretation capabilities, that's, in my view, one of the key things. And the third element here is about what you've just said, Richard, about what is actually inside of this box called synthetic data. So what I often say is that our journey with synthetic data has not started like a couple of months ago when we decided to train the first model. Our journey with synthetic data started when we began to collect our primary data with the surveys many years ago, when we started to purchase new data sources, when we decided to conduct in-depth interviews, because this is the huge, resources environment that we've built. And at the end of the day, the value of the synthetic data will depend on every single almost data point that we collected throughout the years. So these are these elements, in my view, that we need to take into account. When we have answers on all of that, we are confident about the objective, interpretation, and then, what we have in the big box, so to say, then I think we are ready to make a decision whether, synthetic data is useful for a given project or whatever else. So.
And I think one element too where synthetic data is really beneficial is going to be a discovery phase. So instead of doing hypothesis testing with synthetic data, instead do an exploratory phase where you're discovering the hypothesis itself, because data in itself can create something that you may not have had insight on, or maybe a question that could have come up before, or without that data wouldn't have come up. One thing I'm curious about, and Richard, you might be able to answer this, and Doug, I'm sorry if we're kind of jumping all over the place.
Okay, go.
But with the minds, I definitely want to pick the minds here. So my understanding of these models, essentially, it's going to emulate a normal curve over long-term periods of assessing the data that you have, and it's going to try to emulate and create essentially a profile or whatever you're doing in that process to create responses that may occur if they had been asked these questions. And what I'm curious about is, in that kind of modeling, aren't we also missing the extreme factors, the responses outside the normal curve, where it could be that aha moment, where if somebody gives an insight, you can essentially be like, well, we didn't think about that, nobody else had, because what we're doing is we're emulating this normal curve and we're not seeing those extreme factors anymore.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think some of that will come down to, again, as we've said a number of times, the training data and the data that you're using to build that model and the purpose of that model. So we have built some models for our clients which are explicitly designed to be more future facing. So they are taking more extreme niche fringe views from consumers, and we're building sort of models around those areas. And then with the power of the AI models, of course, you can start to open up the temperature on those models, allow more creativity and randomness into the model, which means you can actually start to create some fairly interesting outputs from them. Now, they won't necessarily be entirely verifiable or validated, because you're actually inviting a degree of hallucination in there. But what that's doing is starting to stretch your thinking. Because what AI is very good at is making connections across so many different data points in a way that we as humans can't. And actually what that enables you to do is generate more ideas for that kind of early stage hypothesis, or generate more creative thinking, different sort of adjacencies or different connections that you might typically be able to do with an average consumer in the room. And then that's a great jumping off point for innovation or territory development or whatever it is. But the crucial thing is that you are aware when you are doing that. So you understand that the model is being designed to invite a degree of randomness in there, and that's very different to a synthetic data model, which is designed to replicate how consumers talk now. And I think again, it's about understanding what the model is you built, the data that's gone into it, and how you're planning to use it. Just to kind of re-emphasize what Anna has already said. But I think that you can have that ability to stretch thinking and come up with kind of aha moments. But if you build and sort of enable the models in the right way to do that. I think there's also, though, a really interesting point around synthetic data, and this again is a key reason for the need, an argument for why we still need real human data and real primary data coming through, is that if you're purely using a synthetic data population, there's the risk over time that synthetic data can become degraded, effectively become polluted, because everything starts to kind of go towards the middle. You start to average out a little bit, starts to flatten out, and then you end up in a world of bland where everyone's getting the same answers or the same average kind of centric responses back from that. And the thing that will help to ensure that those data sets don't go that way is to make sure you're speaking to real people and feeding those insights into the models, so they have that kind of variance and that reality coming from real people, and that can help to ensure that your synthetic data doesn't enter that world of bland. And that's a really important part of it as well, of that whole training and managing these data sets.
That actually brings up a couple more questions for me. So, and I guess kind of like a summary of what you were saying is currently a lot of these AI models are very deterministic, if not deterministic as a whole. Essentially, opening up that variance creates a less deterministic response from the simulation, correct? So in regards to that, I'm kind of wondering, sorry, that just slipped my mind. My apologies, yeah. Actually, you know what, go ahead and continue. If it comes back up, I'll go ahead.
No, that's okay. I actually have a kind of a question for everyone. You know, we're going to talk about how we can apply synthetic data in certain verticals. What came to my mind in listening to all of you bounce ideas off each other was where I was doing some research to prepare for the webinar, looking at companies who are offering synthetic data as a primary offering. And so IRB being a primary data company, that's obviously scary, right, for business, for primary data. Do we see a world where synthetic data becomes the primary data? Is that at all possible? Because, you know, we worry about data quality, we worry about AI in primary data usage in open ends and in survey taking. So it's kind of a scary proposition, I think, for the industry. Is there any opinions on whether synthetic data could actually take over from anyone, or is it not? I'll leave it open.
I think we may be all of the general consensus that it never will.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree. I mean, I can imagine that one of the trends could be synthetic data as a service. And for some, you know, companies, it might be the core. And I think that those types of companies already exist, or there are some startups they want to focus on that. But as we said a couple of times before, well, this content, this input is key. So at the end of the day, there must be the human somewhere in this journey, and the role of that human before you bring any value with the synthetic data is critical still, because it's actually, you know, the way how you fuel everything that you're going to deliver then with the synthetic data. So I do not believe in a total switch towards synthetic data. but probably, you know, the significance, the role it will play will be bigger, that's for sure. But that also requires a couple of education, you know, efforts, you know, in the industry. But no, not a replacement. I vote against. I don't believe that's going to be the future.
I agree. Sorry, go for it, Andrew.
Oh, no, I was just going to make a little quip, unless it's like the robotic singularity exists and then we actually have true intelligence from AI. So.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's a whole thing. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I agree. I think the first of all, human oversight is going to remain essential to ensure that the data integrity and ethical standards of the models and all that sort of thing. But also, yeah, as I've already said, those primary human research inputs are going to remain critical to make sure we've got the you know, to deliver the creativity, the reality, the better judgment in terms of the outputs that we're generating here. The two of these things have got to work you know, hand in hand, I think. That's going to be the way forward. I mean, I think there will be cases where, because of the benefits of synthetic data, I suppose, in terms of the, you know, we all know it's going to be more cost effective. It's quicker to generate. You can get answers in minutes rather than, you know, days or weeks. There'll be certain scenarios where people will lean towards it and say, well, it's good enough for what I need right now, and I don't necessarily need both of them. But for the real sort of high quality insight, I think it's going to be that need for both of these elements working together, really.
Great. That's all good. Thank you for your feedback on that, everyone. And moving on to the next question, Rich, I want to ask this to you. We had talked, offline, we had talked about potential data leak challenges being an issue. When I was doing my preparation for the webinar, I found that, you know, there's actually some positive use of synthetic data because it doesn't violate any GDPR, because it's not real people. So it's a way to ensure data privacy. You were just talking about how, depending on the model, if everyone's using the same model, it can become very bland, right? If we all are using the same thing, it'll level out, and then what's the point? So I guess, aside from that, are there any other data challenges? Are there any positives to using synthetic data in terms of data privacy and security or quality?
Yeah, well, I think the sort of third example I gave up front of the intelligent personas, as we call them, the private models we're building for clients, they offer a lot of benefits in that space, because we're building these models bespoke for clients using the client's own proprietary data. Therefore, those models are unique to those clients to some extent, and therefore that means they retain a commercial advantage because they're using their data to feed those models, and no one else will have access to that core training data. So they become private models, but also those models will sit entirely privately as well. So when we build them, they're sitting on private servers. There's no risk of leakage or bleed out to either the underlying large language models or to other models that sit there. And therefore, actually, those models can become quite a safe space in which to test sensitive or confidential materials potentially. Now that's for testing sort of new concepts or ideas. We all know in traditional primary research, we can take great lengths to make things as watertight as possible, but they're never 100% watertight in terms of confidentiality. Whereas actually, I think with some of these private models, you remove that risk. Now, again, whether that's as good as being able to speak to real people is obviously part of the big debate. But there are some real benefits there in having a private model that can simulate how real people would respond to these ideas, but without the risk of that confidentiality issue. So these private models, I think, can offer a lot of benefits to clients in that space too.
Great. Any other thoughts on this question before we move on? Andrew, Anna?
Nothing on mine, but I did remember the question I had, if you have a moment.
No, go for it.
Sorry, it slipped my mind. So one thing I was wondering about, and Richard, this is for you. It's in regards to the models themselves. Whenever we're training them on data, and then we continuously introduce new data that should be more accurate. What I'm curious about is the model itself is learning from potentially outdated data. How do we address that?
It's a good question. Again, in the private models we're building, that can be part of the process that we have, where you can basically strip out information from that core training data layer, so that some of that older data that's been surpassed can be removed, so the model starts to change effectively. I think my concern is in the bigger sort of synthetic data populations, knowing what it's been trained on and understanding what's gone into that, and whether, as you say, there is old legacy data in there or historically inaccurate data or bias that's in there, and not having an awareness of that, that's going to cause issues if you're using those sort of models going forward. So from our point of view, I think there's a need for as much transparency as possible, I suppose, in understanding what's gone into building a data set. And to Anna's point up front, that's a really key thing. If you can kind of tick the box on that one in understanding what's in there and therefore how that's going to impact the output you're getting from it, that's got to be the real starting point there. And so I think to your point, if there is old, inaccurate, biased, skewed data that's been used to build a model and you're unaware of it, then that's going to impact your ability to get good insights from it as well.
Thanks. Very
How do companies in that situation, how are we able to validate the data sets are current? Like how can it be proven that, oh, this data is actually up to date? Oh, there's no bias in this data. There's nothing wrong with the data. What do you do you show the primary data itself and then say, this is the model we built it off of? How does that look? Anyone? Or
Richard, I think that might be.
Yeah, I think it's
I can join. So we take a number of steps with the validation piece. So there's, first of all, when we're building the models from our clients' data, first of all, it's worth saying before we get into that every data set is going to be skewed or biased in some way. I think we're all aware of that in Insight. We all sort of have to mitigate for those subjective biases and that exist in every data set. But that aside, as long as you're starting with the good quality data that's kind of trusted and agreed upon to build the models, when we're building them, there's a number of steps we'll take for the validation of those models. First of all, there's the just to check that it can recall facts accurately, so the known knowns effectively that you've built into the models. You can sort of hide data in there, kind of needle in a haystack type approach, and make sure that the model is able to accurately recall those very niche and hidden pieces of data. The second step we take is when we're getting into its more generative capabilities and the creative from those models. So when we're asking it to effectively replicate how a real consumer might answer a question, what we then do is, when we're building the models, is make sure we retain some holdout data. So data that is from our client, but we never expose the model to it. So we keep it to one side, we build the model, and then we ask the model the questions which exist in that other data set, and then effectively you can run correlation analysis to check how well it is matching that sort of known data sets, even though it's never been exposed to them before. And we can do that both at a sort of quantitative level in terms of testing it against concept testing data or whatever it is, quantitative data, or you can test it qualitatively using kind of semantic meaning type analysis as well, where you analyze some qual outputs and effectively code them up across a number of metrics, and then compare how good the qual outputs are from the AI simulation against the real qual outputs from humans, and we can test them that way. So there's a big validation process, and we start to see really strong correlations, and then that the models are going to be acceptable to work with. After that point, when you're asking to become more creative or generate answers which you can't necessarily validate, that's when I guess your degree of art and expertise starts to come into it, and you have to interpret that through the lens of what you understand as an expert in that category. Do they seem directionally correct in terms of those answers when you're starting to explore new topics and areas that you don't necessarily have data to validate against? And that's again, with any insight, there's going to need to be a degree of creative thinking and so on when you're working with the data, and that's when your own expertise and critical lens needs to come and have a look at what those models are producing. So it's a mixture really of validation. As I say, a lot of it tries to be as data-based as possible, as sort of scientific as possible, but then there's a bit of art and science going on here in terms of how you then take those models forward.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna move. We're at like 10 minutes, Andrew, so we're gonna go past that. But thank you, Anna. Question for you. In primary data, a lot of times when we're dealing with data quality and dealing with quant surveys specifically for IRB, we get asked, are these primary data respondents real? That's a question we get a lot, and that's just with humans. So from your perspective, working on the human insights team and talking to clients, what is the perception you get from clients and from the market on synthetic data and how it's being received?
Yes, we had a chance to chat about it offline, and actually when we discussed that topic, I was I have to admit, I was surprised when I realized that the perception is pretty positive. So compared to many other things that I remember from the past that we started developing, in that case, there is a lot of trust, a lot of hope, a lot of, like impatience when we're going to see the results. And really, it was hard for me to recall actually any kind of a negative feedback or the fear compared even to what you've just said, Joe. So a lot of questions, regarding the real data coming from the humans, and asking about the quality and whether it comes from who we believe it comes. But I would say that this positive attitude has its pros and cons. I mean, this is a good and the bad news for us. So I believe that this is a good news because it gives us the space to develop solutions, to explore, to discover, to implement the new things, adopt new things, do the pilots and everything. So this is great for us as researchers and those who need to explore. But at the same time, I am a little bit scared that this, I don't want to say too positive, but primarily positive attitude does not mean that there is, and actually, I assume that there is some lack of the knowledge and understanding of what that really is. So sometimes, and I'll be completely transparent with the whole group here, that sometimes too much hype about some of the solutions may mean that people trust it too much or believe in it too much. At the end of the day, maybe it's going to be right, but we still need some time when it comes to many different kinds of application of the synthetic data to test, to check, to make sure. And even, what we are discussing here shows that there are some different angles, right? We cannot just, accept it just as it is. We need to still consider a lot of different elements. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to make sure as researchers, and I believe that, there are many researchers here in this group, in our audience, to make sure that we will play an important role to be a smart guide for the audiences, for our clients, for the, going beyond our industry to really educate about what that is, and above all, what that is not. Right. So any considerations like, oh, are these respondents real, and so on and so forth, we need to be very transparent about what that is. It is a kind of a method. It's a solution. It's not creating an, I don't know, chatbots, robots, avatars, people answering, but they not existing or things like that. So like with every other method, and there have been a plenty that we needed at some stage of the, evolution of the research, we needed. So like, online research at some point was like, well, how do we want to do it, right? So so mobile research, so how, wow, with a smartphone. So I remember many situations when we felt like something is really new and we needed to educate the market. So the same situation is here, I believe. So positive feedback, positive reaction, but let's be cautious about it, whether it does not mean too much trust, and also let's make sure and help the market to avoid the situation that people too easily want to use it really to make important decisions. Because here I see the risk, which by the way is the risk with any type of data. Let's remember that. But this is what I would be very cautious about. That's our role, to talk about the advantages and the value, but also about the risks. And hey, guys, hold on, right? Let's think whether this really fits our objectives.
I read a great paper the other day from Isamar a few weeks back that was called the Modern Day Prometheus, which is also the subtitle that we given to Frankenstein, the novel, if you remember that. And that was talking about synthetic data, and effectively the thrust of that paper was around obviously the transformative potential of synthetic data, but also the fact that it's potentially hazardous as well for us as an industry. So kind of a valuable asset, but it's something that needs to be used in a carefully balanced way. So yeah, completely agree with that, Anna.
Thank you both.
One thing,
you want to go? Go ahead.
One thing I'm really curious about is the excitement surrounding it. Is it because of the price and not the value add?
I think that will become part of it. And actually, Doug and I talked sort of yesterday, and actually this speaks very closely to what you just said, Anna, as well. When I started in research 20 years ago, it was just at the tipping point where it was moving from CAPI and sort of CATI interviewing into online interviewing. And at that point, as you said, people were rightly skeptical about online interviews because the concerns about that data being skewed and not being representative of the wider population and so on. which to some extent was true at that point because internet penetration was lower. But at the same time, then you found out that oh, hang on, it only cost me £1.50 an interview. Oh, okay, fine. I will go with that because actually I understand that it might be skewed, but actually it enables me to do some research more cost effectively and more quickly than I could do before, and therefore I'm willing to make that trade-off. Now, I feel like we're probably at a similar tipping point now. It's not quite the same analogy because obviously there were, with internet penetration, it was generally lower now, but we're still at that point where there's a whole bunch of practical benefits here for synthetic data in terms of that cost and efficiency and speed and everything else. But there are those challenges with it too. So I think to some extent there will be a proportion of the market who goes with the synthetic data purely on those functional benefits of cost and time. But I think to deliver really great insight, we need to be taking those concerns into consideration, as you said, and make sure we're balancing any of that data with the sort of real human as well to make sure we're getting proper answers from it. But it does feel as if, there will be a proportion of the market that goes with that drive because of the faster, cheaper factor.
That's correct. However,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would add some but to this. Because I agree. However, I can see, and maybe I am a little bit biased here because I'm working in the company which is a top technology company, technology consulting company. So technology is at the heart of everything we do. So maybe I am a little bit biased here, but I agree with the price factor. It can and probably will play a role, but I think it's also a bit about people's expectation that they will be able to go beyond what is available today. So there is a lot of perception of, okay, today the primary data tells me something about the things that are existing, while synthetic will allow me to predict the future, to go beyond the groups, to do this or that. And so I believe that and that again can have a lot to do with some missing expertise, because it doesn't necessarily always mean that we have these capabilities when dealing with the synthetic data. But I believe that there are many hopes also, related to that it can give much more that we believe we can get from the real human. So I would say that this also, play a role. And again, our role to say, hey, what is possible, what not, and so on. But and the time factor. There's also another thing. So we said price, but there is also the time dimension, right? So the people imagining that instead of, 7 weeks of the field work for the survey, I can do just click, and I have everything on my screen immediately. Wow, that's and it doesn't cost that much like the survey. That's a dream. So to the price, I would add a bit of the curiosity about something unique and available, and then the time, I guess.
Yeah, and I think what you
at least given the work with the clients who always want to have everything for yesterday, then the time factor is one of the important factors.
It's our biggest enemy. So one thing I think we've all kind of highlighted here in regards to this is that synthetic tools or synthetic data tools themselves seem like they can be very beneficial, but it's that knowledge factor of how to utilize them. And I think one question that's been floating around for the past couple of years is, will AI replace the researcher? And I think hands down, it never will. Because without the knowledge base that we have, that we've essentially curated over the years of experience, no one will be able to replace us because we know how to implement these things correctly. And that's how we assess the validity. And that's how we get confidence. And so I think that's like where AI is really going to play an important role in empowering the researcher. So.
Absolutely, but I don't know if you went through the same kind of emotional journey that I have when thinking back about the AI in research. The first reaction was a bit of a fear. Is it the over of my professional specialization? The next phase was about excitement. Wow, how much it can give me. Then it became a kind of everyday life for us until the moment when synthetic data jumped in, actually, because there was a new chapter, as I said before. And now I know that, you never know when is the next day and the next, exciting solution will appear. But yeah, there was this fear at the beginning, but I don't have it now anymore. Like, I feel, yes, this role that we need to play in that is still critical. As we said, every tool is like a pure tool, as long as, it's not kept in the right or wrong hand. So
yeah, I think our roles are going to evolve. We're going to have new skill sets as a result of this new technology, but those fundamental skills are, ability for reasoning, intuition, creativity, and interpretation and application of data to business problems. Those core skills aren't going to go away, and they're going to become even more important than ever. And to some extent, they're the most interesting and exciting bits of our roles. The the consultative bit, the bit where you're applying it to the business problem rather than the data collection necessarily. So I think those core skills aren't going to go away any day soon. At least I hope not.
Yes.
Yeah. But
Thank
Doug,
you.
you have to, Doug, you
And,
have, we have to
yeah.
make a commitment. We have to make a commitment that in, I don't know, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, we meet here in the same group and we will discuss it and we will think about how we perceived it today and versus how it's going to be in 5 years. So let's make this commitment.
I'll just be an avatar at that point.
I was going to say, yeah.
I was scared to hear that. Actually.
I hope not.
Maybe we'll be in the metaverse. We'll see. Anna and I were talking about the metaverse. So we are coming up on the Q&A now. We have a lot of questions coming in from the audience. So thank you. We're gonna move to that portion. We'll leave this open. I'm gonna go through the questions here. Let me read through them to make sure we haven't addressed them already. I think we kind of addressed Kevin's question here. Do you think synthetic data can be completely relied upon, or will it play a supplementary role to primary data? I think we all agree it's going to be a supplement to primary data. It'll be empowering that. Andrew, as you phrased before, the cost impact, we did say it's going to be cheaper, faster, but the quality needs to be stuck with the primary data. So without primary data, it does not exist. Yes, because I'm not the expert here. I'm just making sure my interpretation of what we said is correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my take on it.
Cool. All right, then I learned today. That's good. Sergio asks a question in 2024 where a TikTok video can catch like wildfire and inspire new fashion trend, a political movement or meme. How can synthetic data keep up with these changes in perceptions and preferences? And I think that maybe Rich, you could answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, you're absolutely right that there's always going to be those surprise or quick trends and new things that emerge from humans, and I think that's why in our business as well, alongside the use of AI and the models we're talking around, we'll still have our semioticians, our culture experts, our trends experts sitting there. We have a panel. A sort of global network, which we call the Collective, which is a network of real people, of humans, of experts and fringe consumers and people who live in very different parts of society, and they are fantastic for talking to start to generate insights where the sort of regular mainstream consumers and a lot of generic sort of synthetic samples, or even talking to ChatGPT directly, just won't be able to answer. So that human piece, I think, becomes really important in starting to spot those trends, trying to spot those new things that are emerging. Now, if you have models that perhaps feed on live data from social and so on, it might be you can start to pick those up. So it's not to say they can't exist, but I think your example there of the TikTok piece is just another great reason why we need that sort of human overlay into everything that we're doing, because you need experts in trends, in understanding consumer, to pick up on those things and then apply them.
Great. Next question. Do you have a point you want to add?
Interestingly enough about that, like just with the TikTok data and things like that, well, whenever it comes to any type of social media, you actually wouldn't even necessarily need synthetic data to simulate something like that. You could literally look at the old-fashioned clicks, impressions, and figure out from that alone what is trending and how to modify your approach with that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool, thank you. From Kyle, in a hybrid approach, how do you think synthetic data will change questionnaire design? Do you anticipate an emphasis towards behavioral segmentation alongside demographic data for more robust and accurate insights with synthetic data models?
Yeah, I'm happy to address that one. I have to start with a typical answer from a person from a consulting company. Whether it will be the shift towards will depend on your business objectives, right? So this is our decision whether we want to push that toward the more behavioral segmentation or stick to demographic one. So the decision is still ours. So that hasn't changed. But obviously, synthetic data will give us, or already gives us, new possibilities when it comes to building much more complex kind of segmentations or profiles of respondents that we can analyze because of many reasons. One of them is the ability to go beyond what we can easily measure with a typical survey questionnaire. So obviously it has its own limitations, the survey instrument. So we can ask about some things, but we have a limited place. So the depth of the questions we can ask is limited. Now, synthetic data and different kind of AI solutions will allow us really not only to be much more hybrid, so go beyond the data that we have and go beyond the survey and the primary data that we have, but also, align different kind of profiles that we have from primary data from the survey with other data sources. So yes, at the end of the day, we will have many more technical solutions and possibilities to do that. Whether we want to do that, it depends on the purpose and the objective of the project. But I myself, I have to say, this is one of the most exciting elements for me when it comes to the testing pilots regarding the synthetic data, and something I'm waiting for, like one of the things that I'm waiting for most, I would say. So that's one of the great benefits, that for sure.
Anyone else, anything to add?
Yeah, in regards to the questionnaire design, in my experience, and tell me if yours is the same, it can give you a framework. So you can approach it with, I have these questions, and it can create a simulated form for you. The issue that I have found with that is the complexities in survey design are fairly nuanced in certain areas, and it can't capture it. So if we're needing like piping logic, if we're needing show-if logic, if we're needing particular types of designs in the study, it may not actually be applicable for everything, but I think it's a good start. So let's say if you need a 30-question questionnaire, give it to ChatGPT or whatever else you utilize, it'll populate something for you. You can't just use it though, because you need to make sure that it's asking the right questions and they're designed the right way. Because if you've worked with surveys, you know that if you ask a question a separate way, you're gonna receive a different response.
So human again, human role again.
Yeah.
So that comes back, no matter what you want to say, that comes back always. That's good.
Yep. Yes, that is one of the main themes I've taken away from this webinar. I do want to say we have a lot of questions, and I've been told we can go a little bit over time. So this is good, as long as Rich, Anna, Andrew, you are all good to stick around for a couple extra minutes. Sweet, keep going. This question comes from Taylor. What is the lowest hanging fruit for full service research firms who are looking to make use of synthetic data in client projects? Yeah.
Lowest hanging fruit? I would say initial hypothesis testing to make sure that your approach is the direction you want to go, and then follow up with real research. I say real research like it might be rude, but yeah.
Human-driven research.
Yeah, I think also, hypothesis generation, very good as well for helping to streamline research before you take it into primary. So if you have a list of 10, 20 concepts you might want to test with consumers, but there's not the space to do that, or the money to do that with real people, actually using the models to help you reduce that down to the kind of 3 or 4 you actually want to test with real people. So very similar to the hypothesis generation, but you can use the synthetic sample to help you shape that research. So when you're actually talking to real people, you're really making the best use of that time, because you've already eliminated a lot of the things you don't want to be testing or trying. So it's very, very useful again for that early stage piece as well.
Yeah, supplementing the human data, supplementing the primary. Yeah. Go ahead.
Maybe able to extrapolate on smaller data if you have a trained model on something similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
So collect small portions of data, then apply.
Yeah, your internet's cutting in and out. Sorry to keep cutting you off. I think that the hotspot's getting tired, but it's all good.
I'm gonna switch over.
Okay. While he's doing that, we'll move on to the next question. This comes from Anne. How would a company justify the additional spend on synthetic data if they already have primary data used as the input for the AI to produce the synthetic data? Are you in that case, are you spending more to tell the same story, or is that not the application?
Well, I think again, I'll start here. I think with the again, one of the benefits of AI, not necessarily with synthetic data, but is to help you make sense of some of that historical data that you might have to kind of know what's already known. So if you have that sort of legacy data set, actually applying that into a model, you can use the AI to interrogate that data, and it becomes easier for you to, in an intuitive way, start to extract value back from that data set. Because often you run research projects that are for a specific purpose, but there might be another interesting finding that came up during that project but wasn't relevant at that particular time, and therefore never got used. But actually, if you start to take all that data, all that stuff off the cutting room floor, and use it to train a model, and then interrogate that data using the AI, it can start to pull out some really interesting new insights from an old data set. So I think actually that's not necessarily about creating new synthetic research, but more about using AI to extract additional value from the data that you have. I think also then, if you're moving into then using that data to train a model, so then it can then start to replicate how a consumer might respond. Yes, you are, you have already spent that money on that previous research, but the point is, because when you're combining it with the generative capabilities of AI, it will start to create new insight as well, but do that in a more sort of cost-effective and quicker way than always going to primary. So because you're training the model on a good historical solid data set, the AI can then apply the generative capabilities through that lens and start to generate new insights. So you're not just getting the same stuff played back to you all the time, you will start to generate new insight too. So there is a way to I think justify that spend, and also make sure you're continuing to use the data that you've spent years collecting, and actually make sure you're getting extra value from that.
Cool. All right, let's move on to the next question. This is from Rostislav. In our experience with synthetic respondents, the aha moments typically come from humans, which synthetic respondents amplify. So synthetic respondents often get the mean right, but the variance of data is where they struggle. What is your perspective? I think, Rich, you talked about this in kind of not getting to a point where it's all bland. Maybe you could address this one again.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that they will start to play back some of what's already known, and it depends on how you're building the model and what you're allowing it to do, because as I said, if you do open up those models to invite a greater degree of randomness in there, they move further away from the accuracy of what's already been asked, and actually move into creating new sort of ideas and so on, and they can still start to be used to spark new ideas. Now, obviously, at that point, whether you can verify and validate what they're producing is a sort of different question. But absolutely, if you're allowing the models to operate in that with a greater degree of randomness and invite some hallucination, you can start to get some really interesting outputs from them. Again, that's the decision on whether you're trying to accurately replicate what real people say right now, or you're trying to use the AI to help springboard your thinking or stretch your thinking in different directions. And there's the different applications, essentially.
Any other thoughts? Other questions popped in? Cool. Next question comes from Finn. If the synthetic data is offered as the primary solution, and yet algorithmic models deteriorate after 4 to 5 years, how do we ensure that long-term trend data, which is presumably now being synthesized and compared by different models, is consistent? Did my word flubbing mess it up? Do I need to do it again?
Yeah, I sort of missed the...
Yeah, okay. If synthetic data is offered as the primary solution and algorithmic models deteriorate after 4 to 5 years, how are we ensuring the long-term trend data is consistent?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me that comes back to the point around absolutely the synthetic populations can degrade, and then it becomes around using new real-life human data, other credible data sources to start to refresh those models and start to learn again. I think there is that concern that if you're only using synthetic data and even I think you're starting to feed those models with social media data only, which actually been generated more and more by bots these days on social media, then you're feeding synthetic data with synthetic data. Those models are going to get worse. To me, that all comes down to that need for that human data and those new rich data sets continue to feed and improve the models. And again, just being aware of those limitations and not assuming that the model you built is going to be fit for purpose 2-3 years down the line, it's going to need refreshing and revalidating.
Continuing to input new primary data. Again, the human touch still holding strong. Good. This question, I guess we can kind of expand on this. This comes from Ashutosh. What is the ideal set of training data? Is there an ideal set of training data? In primary research, sample sizes can be small and the data point can change from survey to survey. How can synthetic data be used in these types of surveys, and how reliable can it be? I feel like we've talked on some of these themes, but the sample size is interesting, or the ideal set.
My minor tidbit on this is essentially the more sample you have, the more confidence you'll have. So it's not a matter of like what is the best size, just recognize that as you add more data, you add more validity. Although there might be a minimum amount. Richard, if you have an idea there, feel free to share.
No, I think it's a good point. And also, because some of the models we're building are using multiple data sources to build from, again, to that that benefit of triangulating multiple sources of data lenses in any work you're doing. So there will be some quantitative data, but we'll also use rich sort of qualitative transcripts and information as well to train models. We'll use broader macro cultural trends reports. We'll use other data sources as well. So from our point of view, there is as you say, to some extent, the more data, the better. But it's also the rich variation of data you're providing helps to make sure that the models become as kind of rounded and useful as possible too.
And one thing I've been thinking about in regards to that typically isn't accounted for is going to be implicit factors whenever it comes to data. So let's say you have a US-based set of data, and then you have a UK-based set of data. Do you treat them differently with your models? Because there are implicit factors between different markets that could impact something if we're not correcting for it or accounting for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great point. And again, that comes down to that data curation piece, doesn't it? Understanding what you're putting in and how different it is, and if it is, you need to allow for that in the model and how that's going to impact and potentially skew the output you get from that. But you're right, you can't assume that every data set's going to be of equal weight and validity in the model. Again, it comes down to what are you building, what are you going to use it for, and therefore what data do we need to make that as robust as possible, I think.
Okay. Yeah. This next question comes from Peter. Is anyone concerned that synthetic data is required, and is it hiding a multitude of sins that actually addressing fraud in panels would address? So this seems to be a quality control question.
So the latter part of the question, what was it again?
Is it hiding, it being synthetic data, is it hiding a multitude of sins that actually addressing fraud in panels would address?
I mean, if you can, here's my personal opinion whenever it comes to fraudulent data. If they can pass as a human, they're a human. If they pass all rigors of essential quality checks, then they are a human in an actual data set. If the synthetic data sample can get to the point where it can pass the rigors of those kinds of quality checks, I would essentially consider them a good respondent. But here's kind of a tidbit in regards to why that might be an important question for our industry, is the entire industry's backbone has been based on quality measures to remove simulated bots and also artificial data from our actual data sets. And so that perspective in itself and all of our quality measures, if we built them up to make sure that we're removing all of that and the synthetic data is passing the sniff test, then it's probably applicable to be used as data in regards to those quality checks. The validity itself still may be in question though.
Okay. That was a good question. Another question from Finn. If synthesized data has degraded and yet forms part of a much bigger data lake, how would you recommend being able to clean the data of the lake, being a metaphor, clean the data lake of a polluted synthesized information? I think we kind of talked about this, Rich, in our conversation yesterday, course correcting for a bad data set that's used to create a synthetic data set.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess with the models we're building, they tend to be, because they're private models for clients, of smaller scale necessarily than the sort of huge data lakes that I think the question's referring to. And there will be different approaches, which sort of goes beyond my skill set in terms of how you do that cleaning at that sort of data lake level. But I think that point around course correction is the right one. But I probably need to speak to our technical team who work in those huge data sets to kind of give you a more robust answer on that one, I think.
Okay. We have 2 more questions, and then we will be able to close it out. This question comes from David. Is the quality of synthetic data output only as good as the quality of the seed data? Should there be greater emphasis placed on exactly what is coming in? Surely there's a danger of amplifying data fraud. I think this also kind of ties in.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I'd definitely support that. And as we said earlier, that kind of garbage in, garbage out piece, effectively. Yeah, the seed data you're using to train the models is going to have a huge impact on the quality of what you get out.
Okay. Here's a interesting question. This comes from Anne. It's the final question that we have. And this is for each of you. So has Verve, Accenture, or Remesh, have any of you used synthetic data yet to guide your own internal business decisions, to get an understanding of how reliable you all view synthetic data? And of course, proprietary information withheld. To the best of your ability, have you used any sort of synthetic data to guide your decisions? Who wants to go first?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. Great question as the last question. Couldn't imagine a better one, so that must have been planned somehow. But no, seriously. So you won't be surprised if I tell you that talking about the internal business decisions is a little bit sensitive topic, so I cannot, talk too much about the details, but I can answer this question the other way around. In case of Accenture and Accenture Research, there is one rule. We never within the research area, so to say, we never do anything that we wouldn't recommend to ourselves as well. We never publish any business kind of recommendation, anything about the trends or advice or anything. And that includes also the methodologies that we use that we wouldn't recommend to ourselves as a client. So that would be my answer to that. So that's a rule that exists like across everything that we do. So I hope that it somehow answers the question from Anne.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Oh, sorry, Andrew.
You can go ahead, Richard. It's fine.
No, I think it's a great answer. And I think also, I mean, we are certainly using generative AI capabilities to help with, internal processes, the way we do things, the way we think about things, the way we do our planning. All of that capability is so rich and powerful that, yeah, we will apply it. Whether we're generating full synthetic samples to ask the questions of, perhaps not quite yet, but we're certainly using the power of generative AI within our sort of strategic planning and just improving the way that we work on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I actually love this question because it's such a good way to kind of plug our companies too. We have full trust in our product, enough so to where every other week, and I'm actually missing it right now, we have a town hall where a portion of it is actually going to be a Q&A session where we utilize our platform. And then afterwards, we review the responses and our approaches for quarterly planning, for any type of implementation internally, externally, client-facing decisions. It's all put through our platform to decide what is actually going to be the best thing to do to move forward. And it gives us insights that we may not have already had because we actually hear from everybody in the company too.
Okay. Thank you all for being bold enough to answer those questions. And again, with the proprietary stuff, it can be a little tricky, but that is a great last question. I think we'll wrap it up here. Thank you, Rich, Anna, Andrew. Thank you for your time, for extending your time a couple extra minutes. Thank you to the panel, to the guests of the webinar. Thanks to IRB for hosting, of course. We will, again, as I mentioned, be putting this online. We'll be sharing it with everyone later. And next month, we'll have another webinar too. So I hope everyone who finds this interesting will come back and see us again next month for a new topic. But thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.